Welcome to the first event of the Holocaust Genocide and Interfaith Center, Education Center. I would like to invite Lois Hart here to give us our blessing for the evening.
Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. Good and gracious God, indeed we gather this afternoon in your holy presence and in the holy presence of each other. We bless you and we thank you for the opportunities of this day and the insight and fellowship we will share here this afternoon. We are grateful for this gathering and thankful to be a part of it. We ask you to bless our guests in a special way. Inspire them and the words and insights they will share with us as women of great faith in you. Bless all of us present and open our hearts and minds to hear with love, compassion, and understanding. Give us all the strength and the desire to be part of your compassion so that we can help repair the world. Send us forth with new knowledge and a greater capacity to be your healing instruments in a broken world. And in your holy presence we say, Amen.
Thank you so much, Lois. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for being here. I see some of my students and I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you. I feel honored and happy to be part of the Manhattan College and Riverdale community. The religious studies faculty, Dr. Jeff Horn, the community, the administration, and especially the staff have been a strong force for me as I have embarked on this new venture. Please find the calendar of events for the center on your tables. And I also invite all of you to visit the center's room, which is now in the library here on the third floor, 315th. It'll be open for all that want to go see it after the event. As part of the Holocaust Genocide and Interfaith Center's new expansion, I wanted to honor the 10th anniversary of 9/11 and ask the important question of healing and hope in our diverse community. Keeping with Manhattan College's mission of social justice, I hope that the students here will recognize that the Bronx community is diverse, poor, and in need of your help. Just recently, the statistics in New York on unemployment showed that single moms in the Bronx are in the deepest peril in New York. With that in mind, I ask, how can we help in any way outside of just dialogue? How can we implement social action to understand and experience the diverse needs of the Bronx and larger community? I want to begin this afternoon, with a quote that has affirmed my commitment to the Holocaust and interfaith work. It is from an astoundingly beautiful book, Besa, about the Albanian Muslims who protected the Jews from persecution. A Muslim rescuer writes, "We, Bektashi, see God everywhere and everyone. God is in every pore and every cell. Therefore, we are all God's children. There cannot be infidels. There cannot be discrimination. We knew we were sheltering a Jewish family. We gave them Muslim names. Every good face is the face of God. We could not see Jews being killed because we would feel that they were killing God." I believe that 9/11, even though seen amongst a sea of loss, mistrust, and destruction, I still want to bring hope, healing, and social action. This is the type of optimism the center brings to the community, but also the future full of hope for our students. Many concerns led me to this panel that are not comforting, nor are they helpful. But I wanted to turn this anniversary into a healing event for the college's community. My deep concerns about 9/11 vary from conspiracy theories of mistrust of government, of one another's faith, and most importantly, that only one singular group suffered. I also felt that the void of female voices was one of the missing links in the whole dialogue of 9/11. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce this beautiful panel of highly intellectual and spiritual women leaders that can lead us into a path of mutual understanding and knowledge. I hope that each participant will have 5 to 8 minutes to reflect on my questions, and I hope we can open up to dialogue and questions. So I'm going to do this historically for all the students. So the first religion is Judaism in terms of Abrahamic faith. So we start with our Jewish panelist, who is a dear friend and a lovely woman that I came to know in Malaysia because of Daisy, actually, because I'm part of the Wise Woman Initiative. So there's sort of an interconnectedness here. This is Rory Pickernese, is a student of Yeshiva Maharat, a pioneering institution training Orthodox Jewish women to be spiritual leaders and halakha Jewish legal authorities. She previously served as acting executive director for Religions for Peace USA, program coordinator for the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, assistant director of interreligious affairs for the American Jewish Committee, and Rory is on the board of the Young Leadership Council of the International Council of Christians and Jews, a member of the Religious of Peace Global Youth Network, a CLAL, Rabbis Without Borders student fellow, co-editor of Interactive Faith, the Essential Interreligious Community Building Handbook. She received her bachelor's degree in the Religious Studies and Political Science from the Macaulay Honors, I made it sound better, Honors College at Hunter College, and has studied at the Jewish Institute for Jewish Education, Seton Hall University. I also want to say Rory has just given birth to a beautiful daughter, and she lives here in Brooklyn with her husband. So let's welcome Rory, and what I'm going to do is introduce each panel separately so it doesn't just phase out. They're a very distinctive woman, and I'm going to ask Rory her first question, but before I do that, let's give her an applause. So my first question to all of our panelists today is very personal, but extremely important. I was in Los Angeles during 9/11, and I watched 9/11 on TV with my son, who was 8 at that point. My question would be, how did you react, and what did you do when you heard, saw, or experienced 9/11?
Hi everybody, and thank you so much, first of all, for having me here. When I received the questions for this panel, it's difficult to reflect back 10 years ago to 9/11. And my first reaction, actually, when I saw the question, my first reaction when I saw the questions was, I'm not sure if you completely realized how old I was at 9/11. On September 11, 2001, I was on my first Tuesday of 11th grade in high school in Brooklyn. I attended an all-girls yeshiva, and we were in, I think, second period of the day. I remember being very worried about Tuesdays. We didn't have lunch that day, Tuesdays. It was my first Tuesday. I was very upset about having this full day of classes nonstop. And we were in the middle of this, I think it was at the end of first period, someone came in and they said, 2 planes just hit the Twin Towers. And everyone, I don't know, I'm sure everyone had sort of similar things when they heard it. My first reaction was, well, that's really odd. How come the second one didn't see it? Like, one accident, but, they're kind of big. How did they not notice that? And we were in the middle of second period, and it was actually Hebrew class. It was taught by an Israeli woman. And the principal came into class to tell everybody that there was an act of terror and 2 planes had hit the Twin Towers. And it still hadn't quite hit me yet. And somebody asked the principal, they said, what's the status of the towers? She very solemnly said, level. And that was really when we all just realized, oh my God, something huge just happened. And from our window in Brooklyn, we could see, on a clear day, we could see the tops of the Twin Towers. And so we were seeing the smoke billowing up. And we were terrified. We had no idea what was going on. And all of these stories were going on at the time. There were 4 planes on it. There were 4 other planes. I think at the time they were saying 8 planes unaccounted for. Who knows what stories were going around. We had no idea what was happening. And all they told us was, stay away from the windows. Nobody knows what's happening. Stay away from the windows. And so we're sitting there in absolute fear. And the teacher stands up. She goes on teaching. And we all were horrified. We said, what are you doing? You just told us there's this terrorist attack. How could you possibly keep teaching? And she said, I come from Israel. This is what we do. You don't let it stop you. You keep on teaching. And that's what she did. She kept on teaching. I don't remember a word of what she said that day. I have no idea. For her, this was her message to us. Her message was, this is nothing new. This is what, now the rest of the world knows what Israel feels like. And that was the sentiment that we had in school that day. It was 2001, it was the time of the Intifada, and the attitude was, okay, now the rest of the world knows also. Well, America, that's the rest of the world, right? We went home later that day. They let us out. I think we had a prayer ceremony first, and we went home. And I went home to watch what was happening and to talk about it in the community. Synagogue had a memorial service that night immediately. And I was saying before, I actually came from one of the communities that was one of the communities that loved all the conspiracy theories. For me personally, hearing about what had happened was really my first direct experience of terrorism, but I didn't have a lot of Muslim friends at the time. I was in this very, very sheltered school, and this was really my first introduction. I knew about terrorism in Israel, and now I knew about terrorism in America. I knew of other people. The other picture, I should say, of the community was of rabbis who did walk down to Ground Zero. There were rabbis who participated in interfaith prayer ceremonies. There were rabbis who were there to console people of all faith communities. There was groups of women who went to the different places where they were bringing the bodies, or sometimes, as often the case, body parts, to sit with the bodies, because as part of the Jewish tradition, you couldn't leave body parts alone. And they didn't know who was what, right? What anybody was. And so there were women who took shifts just to sit with the body parts, just to sit with them, to make sure that somebody was always present at all times. And so we sit with, I guess, these two sides of it. We had people who were trying to reach out, who used it as an opportunity to go to offer consolation to all people. And at the same time, I know that for myself personally, that was really a moment of insularity. It was a moment where I like to think that it became a moment for me later on of learning and of growth. But at the time, it was not an opportunity that we really took in my school. It was an opportunity to really turn into ourselves. It was an opportunity to really talk about how the rest of the world hated the Jews, and how this was just one other opportunity of terrorism.
Our next panelist with the same question, Dr. Elena Procario-Foley. Some of you know her here, and Elena is also on our board at the Holocaust Genocide Interfaith Center. She's an amazing woman, and I can never keep up with her, and she has 3 children, so hats off to you, Elena. But she holds a PhD and MA degree in theology from the Divinity School of the University of Chicago. Her dissertation explored the Christology of the Flemish Dominican Edward Schleiermacher. For the past 12 years, she has worked to revision theology through the lens of Jewish-Christian reconciliation. Since 1999, Procario-Foley has served as a Jewish School professor of Jewish Catholic Studies at Iona College in New Rochelle, New York. She has lectured at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City and frequently speaks for parishes and synagogues. Ilana leads annual study abroad courses for undergraduate students to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Garofoli is the chair of the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations, former secretary of the College Theology Society, and holds membership in the American Academy of Religion, the Catholic Theological Society of America, the Work Group in Constructive Theology. Do you see why it's just like there's a lot going on here? And the Christian Scholars Group on Jewish-Christian Relations. Most recently, she completed the 13-month Christian Leadership Initiative, a fellowship sponsored by the American Jewish Committee and the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, Israel. Thank you, Alana, for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Freedy, and for the invitation. It's good to be here. My personal reaction to 9/11. For the students here, I'm sure you've heard before that 9/11, September 11, 2001, is, the question for your generation. Where were you then? For many people in the room, it was where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot? And though I know where I was when John F. Kennedy was shot, I have a much better cognitive sense of what I was doing on 9/11. I found out in my children's pediatrician's office. My third child was having her 7th-month checkup. I remember vividly the clear blue sky, the beautiful early autumn day. And a nurse came in and said, "Did you hear what happened? Someone, a plane hit them." I'm thinking a plane hit the Twin Towers. I thought it was a horrible accident, a small prop plane, new pilot, putzing around in downtown and got caught in the winds of all the big buildings there. Or alternatively, I did think it was some sort of radical on a suicide mission to make a statement, and there might be damage to a window, but that person would be the only person destroyed by this. So then when the pediatrician came in, by that time the first tower had fallen, and so there was obviously terror and then shock, followed by incredulity, which I think was everyone's reaction at some point. I know where I was when the second tower fell because I was turning a corner trying to park at my office to go find my husband, who also works at Iona College, and to decide. So I had 2 little kids in tow, a 2-year-old, a 7-month-old, and wanted to get to my 5-year-old at kindergarten, and trying to decide, should we go get him, should we not get him? Worried about all my brother-in-laws working downtown. On my side of the family, all my brother-in-laws on the other side of the family who are living in D.C. and working near the White House and on the Hill. So there was all of that. And what did we do? I grabbed my husband out of a crowd because I knew he was planning. He's the director of the Center for Campus Ministries. And so we prayed. Iona, as I'm sure Manhattan College did, quickly gathered in a main area for an early morning vigil. You were watching with your son. Mine, as I said, was 5 years old. A lot of people disagreed, but we did not give them any information. We just told them some bad guys had done some bad things, and we were trying to follow it. He didn't really know anything until the first anniversary, when he came up in 1st grade. So, you can't function in terror. You can't function in such searing pain. So you have to make a decision to go forward. So you do, as the pediatrician said, you grab your kids, you hold them tight, hold them close. So we did that the first day. You just want to respond to the first question on the other. Okay. So I don't know that there was anything in particular. Catholics do what Catholics do in a crisis, and you have a deep sacramental system, and there are all sorts of prayer vigils, masses, other types of liturgical services that you can have. And the college did those, the parish did them. The college also had various interfaith services in the weeks that followed. We found out that family members everywhere were okay, and the next step was to call New Zealand because we had family members there and we knew they couldn't get through. So we were trying to get to the family members in New Zealand to tell them that everyone was fine. And we got that done, got all the kids home from school. And just then tried to be present to the students in the days that followed, to listen for, in the college context, to work together as a community with campus ministries, with the counseling center, the faculty, the administrators to try to help students who are affected. One of our faculty is trained in first response and trauma, chair of the psychology department. One of my faculty members has spiritual direction degrees, and they both were down as first responders from the college. So, I know you asked for personal reactions, but it's hard to separate, I think, what happened personally with, what you're doing at the time, and our lives are bound up with raising our kids and raising them at the college, essentially. So these were all combined reactions as our friends going down there. One of my students went down as a firefighter to help. So I just think that's, as far as a personal reaction, that's what happened first, and you have to kind of process everything else that happened. Other memories from what happened later, the first anniversary and other, events are actually more clear in terms of what we did. So.
Thank you, Elena. Now I'm going to ask another friend of mine. I'm realizing how wonderful these women are, and I don't even live in New York, and I have these 3 friends who are I haven't lived in New York, so now I'm here 3 months, and I already have these 3 wonderful women. And Daisy is another friend of mine, but also someone I work with on Muslim women's issues. And she is executive director of ASMA, the American Society for Muslim Advancement, a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing an American Muslim identity and to building bridges between the Muslim community and the general public through dialogue in faith, identity, culture, and arts. In the aftermath of 9/11, Ms. Khan focused on creating interfaith programs aimed at seeking commonalities among the Abrahamic faith traditions, such as groundbreaking theater production titled Same Difference and the Cordoba Bread Feast, Interfaith Banquet. Given the ascendancy of issues of youth and women's marginalization and sectarian divides in the global Muslim community, Ms. Khan has launched 2 cutting-edge interfaith programs to create movements of change amongst the 2 disempowered majorities in the Muslim world, youth and women. The MLT, Muslim Leaders of Tomorrow, and WISE, Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality programs were successfully launched at a global scale in Copenhagen and in New York. Ms. Khan frequently lectures in the United States and internationally, and has appeared on various media outlets such as PBS, BBC World, CNN. Most recently, Ms. Khan and her husband Imam Faisal were awarded the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award. Welcome, Daisy.
Always wonderful to be here at the invitation of my very good friend, Dr. Afri, I should say. And well, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I particularly want to thank the students who I love engaging with students and being here with all my other distinguished panelists. In 1987, I got one of my second jobs, and as an architectural designer. It just so happened that the job was on the 106th floor of the World Trade Center at a company called Shir Sandini Brothers. I started working there, and the World Trade Center towers were a tourist destination for people, and so my entire family would ask me to take them there. So it was very routine for me to spend weekends in the towers on the 106th floor, showing people the incredible view that I had from my building. One of the things that you learn when you're in a building that tall is frequent exit strategies in case there's a fire or in case there's a way for you to, what you have to do. While I was there, there was one time, some of you who are older will remember this, there was a blackout. And we actually had to walk down 106 flights. You think that just walking down is easy, right? But when you're going around the staircase like this, like this, like this, it took us 2.5 hours just to walk down. And I remember those stairs intimately, the feeling of crushed humanity trying to get down, in a rhythm. So, having had that experience and understanding what exit strategies are like, and knowing that there are only 3 ways to get out when you're on the top floor. One is the roof, the second one is the stair, and the third one is out the window. Fast forward, 2001? September 10th. I was no longer in the towers. I had already moved down to another job. My husband and I were in Golden, Colorado, a very, very beautiful mountaintop, conducting my stepdaughter's wedding. And it was the most pristine day, happy, and following the next day, we were at a place like this, which was a breakfast place in a hotel, getting ready to take our flight. It was around 8 something. And somebody screamed, like we all know, somebody screamed, said, "Come and see what's going on the television." So we rushed out, and all of a sudden, I'm transfixed. This is my office building. This is our neighborhood. Our mosque was only 12 blocks from there. This is our city, and this is our country. And I kept thinking, oh my God, we're not there. And this whole time, I was already convinced that there would have to be a hand of Muslim extremists, fanatics, terrorists. Because I had also seen the second bombing, the attempt at the second bombing, if you remember that one, when Ramzi Youssef had gone in with his truck and had seen that from the neighborhood where I was in the towers. And I was so confused because on the one hand it was my neighborhood, my towers, and I saw these specks coming out, and people thought it was paper, and I knew that that was not paper. I knew that those were colleagues and friends that had made that last minute decision that the only way to survive and not to burn or to have your family retrieve your body parts was to actually throw themselves out the window. I knew exactly what that was. Holding hands, you saw a lot of those images. So, and of course I looked at my husband and he looked at me and we said, we hope to God that it's not Muslims, because we knew that such a big attack on the mainland of America by any entity, any group, would have an effect on that community, a negative effect on that community. And so we were, worried, not only for our city, our country, our neighborhood, but also deeply worried for the Muslim community, because we knew what was coming. And then we tried to get back, as many people did, and there was a lockdown, there were no planes. Fortunately, because my husband loves cars, he had rented this enormous Lincoln car to go like 5 miles. And we had this car that was fully loaded with a cell phone, with everything. Very luxurious car, and because it was a state of emergency, the car rental company said, it's okay, go ahead, cross country with the car. You can drop it off on the other side. So we drove. It took us 5 days. And I think our phone bill was $4,000. Because my husband is a techno guy, he had a cell phone. In those days, many people didn't have a cell phone. And we started getting calls from the media. What if it's a Muslim? And because our mosque was one of the closest mosques, and he was the imam of that mosque, people started already doing their analysis prior to even becoming public that it was Muslims. So there was already this what if, but who do you think could have? What about Ramzi Youssef? Who's he connected to? So all these questions that were being asked of us. And we knew then and there, our lives had changed for good. It's never going to be the same. So when we got back, the mosque was shut down because everything south of the canal was closed. But a few people that were part of our community who still were able to venture out said that they had seen flowers outside our house. Because we were a small little community and we didn't disturb the neighborhood, we were seen as an asset to the neighborhood. People left us flowers because they were petrified for us. I mean, this is Tribeca. This is the artist community. He left us flowers saying, don't worry, and they were protecting that whole building. And then we began to find out that there were actually members of our community that had died. And we started frantically making phone calls. And as we made phone calls, we discovered that the families who had lost loved ones were also being accused of potentially being terrorists. Imagine a mother who has lost her son is then being accused of, your son probably was the guy who did it. So we had to administer to that. So we stopped thinking about ourselves, we stopped thinking about anything else, and we went to the business of administering, making phone calls, taking care of our community. And it feels as though nothing has really changed, because so much has happened in the 10 years, but 10 years later we find ourselves still having to defend ourselves. And I'm sure last year you heard about the whole controversy with the Lower Manhattan Community Center that we had proposed, and we were very much behind that. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about that in the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. Okay, what I want to do now is just open it up so the three participants can dialogue, and then we'll take questions. So what I had sent to each participant was, what have your faith communities done to heal for this event? Can they do more? As women spiritual leaders, how does this impact you differently, if at all? And sort of like, anecdotally, if you can just share with the young students here, the future leaders, your hope about healing. We talk about shock and awe, and Daisy just left off saying nothing has changed. What can we change? What can we make our students aware of? How can we give the messages of hope and healing so that we're not scarred, especially amongst faith communities? So I'm going to open up to either one of you, no historical lineage, whoever wants to go first.
I was just clarifying. I have to state the obvious. Hope and healing for the future, so that things, it's sad, it's distressing, very distressing to hear Daisy say nothing's changed, but we know there's so much reality to that for the Muslim community. So the obvious is that change and hope comes with education. And so the students here have a wonderful department of religious studies, a wonderful department of history, and now Dr. Freedy in the religious studies department. So there is so much you can learn from your faculty in your regular classes, in conversations with them about religions, religious studies, the history of interactions between the different religions. So hope has got to be there in education, and in the communities. Then the education happens in the various initiatives, some of which Dr. Freedy mentioned that she's involved with, and others. The multiplication of efforts to understand each other, to quote a phrase from a Catholic theologian, Peter Fahn, to be religious interreligiously, okay, which does not mean to give up your own faith commitments, but to be religious interreligiously. That's our goal, that's our vision. So, as Dr. Freedy said, I chair the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations. That represents over 30 centers that study Jewish Christian or Jewish Christian Muslim relations, and a few that have their interreligious boundaries much more broadly defined. At centers at colleges and universities in the United States, and we haven't captured everyone yet. We're always trying to find more and invite them to membership. So that's on a scholarly level. Lots of spontaneous interfaith efforts that need to be raised up and celebrated. So to mention one that's more local in Westchester County, northern Westchester County and Dobbs Ferry, there were students at that high school who wanted to know about each other. They realized it's a public high school, and they said, you know, we don't know what you do on your holy days and holidays. And so Jews, Christians, Muslims, and some others got together, and at a public school, they formed an interfaith service club. You know, this is before Ibn Battel, you know, kind of cornered the market on this for us. But, you know, we highlight his work and the work at the White House level, so from high schools to the White House. But these students in Ossining, and forgive me for forgetting the name of their group, but they started out and they said, well, let's do something together. What needs doing in town? And they rebuilt a park in a poor neighborhood of town that was in desperate need of a wholesome place for kids to play of various ages. So they did the work, I guess they got donations, and in the process of doing this, they learned about each other. So they learned about each other's religions, they learned about the similarities, they learned where there were differences. This was a wonderful example. In various towns, there existed interreligious councils to begin with, and where they didn't exist, more developed. So in New Rochelle, there's a 30-year-old interreligious council, and so they started as a Jewish Christian organization, and over the years they expanded to as many faith communities as there were in New Rochelle, and they went looking for more partners, for Muslim partners, for partners of other faith, so that the Interreligious Council of New Rochelle then sponsors on community levels various service activities, interreligious prayer activities, and lectures to inspire people. So these are all the different types of educational opportunities, and that's where the hope has to be. Otherwise, I don't know what we're doing here and why we continue to draw our paychecks. So there has to be hope that way. Well, seriously, I mean, it's right. Otherwise, why? So that there really has to be hope. So in my regard, what I did was intensify the work that I had begun in Jewish-Christian relations. Particularly, you mentioned conspiracy theories. Oh, it's a Jewish community that actually brought down the towers. Not a single Jew died. They were all in New Jersey. These, you know, you heard these things. So you have to work against all of that, and so you have to have your multiple, what we call bilateral. So between two religions, you have to have your Jewish Christian and your Jewish Muslim dialogue, and your Buddhist Jewish and your, you know, Muslim Christian, and you have to have all these bilateral dialogues and then bring them all together. Not every dialogue's at the same place.
Great, thank you, Ellen.
As I was saying a little bit before, I think that in my own experience, I was one of the people who was sort of part of some of those conspiracy theories. I was in a very insular community. I was in high school. I like to think that a lot of people are much more critical thinking in high school than I was, and I unfortunately really, this was the world that I knew. This were the people that I knew and trusted. And so I like to think of my own story as a story of healing, of how I got from that room on September 11th to being here today with everybody here. The first time I went to Israel was in 2002. It was actually the spring after 9/11. And so my first time flying internationally was post 9/11. Although then you could still bring drinks and wear shoes. That was so I've still seen somewhat of that trajectory. But this was very much my experience, was really seeing the world. I remember very vividly, and yet at the same time, I really grew up at the same time in this post 9/11 world. I went to college, and really it was in college that I started to realize that the things that I was repeating over maybe weren't actually true. And maybe I should actually research this a little bit more. I became interested in religion in part because I was one of the few Jewish people in my cohort. I found myself explaining Judaism to a lot of people, and I thought this was a really interesting thing to study. And I thought, well, I had gotten into a lot of discussions with people about religion through language, and so I thought it would be really great to study Arabic, only because I was interested in learning world religions. I decided to do ancient Greek. I thought, why not? Let's just get all of some of those big bases covered. And all of a sudden, I'm studying Arabic. It was the first time my college had started offering Arabic. Everyone in my class was political science majors, and all the words that we learned were how to say army, war, Jerusalem, Palestine. This was what United Nations. These were the words that everyone thought you needed to know. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to learn what the religion was about. And I started to really realize that these things were really much too tied together. And so I started to study a little bit more of the politics behind it, and started to realize that the people who were talking about these politics had no idea who the people were behind it. People are sitting in these rooms, in these academies, and they were talking about, well, here's this great solution, and here's this great solution. And I thought, well, at this point, I've been to Israel once, but that made me an expert, right? So I've been there, and that's not going to work. And you have no idea who lives there. And then I started to realize I have no idea who lives there. And so I started to get involved, as Elena was talking about, in dialogue. And at the time that I was getting involved in dialogue, I really was getting involved because I thought, well, you know what? When people asked me why I was doing it, people were horrified. I was talking to Christians, I was talking to Muslims. This is atrocious. And I said to them, oh, because if something else happens, there should be somebody to talk to. And this is how I started off. I said, if something else happens, and it was completely, really, it was peremptory, right? When something else happens, I'm going to be ready to have somebody to talk to and to know what's really going on. And that really changed over time. And I like to think it really turned from that idea of tolerance really to friendship and to these wonderful women that I'm sitting with here. And I think that the most important thing then that I've learned, and the most important thing about learning so much, is really having to then be that representative and really speak up. And I found myself going back into my own community and, first of all, having people stop me on the street and say, you went to Malaysia? Did they try to kill you? I said, no, they were the most wonderful people I've ever met. It was just, to come back and tell people, this is what happened when I went to Malaysia, and these were the people that I met, and they were really just the loveliest people. We had, at one point in my own synagogue, this is not something that I'm very proud of, but I feel like I should share this as part of the story. Just last summer, I was on the board of the synagogue, and somebody sent an email out, and they said, oh, there's this film. Somebody offered that we could show this film for free. It's called The Third Jihad, and it's all about, some of you might have heard of this, right? It's all about the Muslim secret plot to take over America. And I wrote back a whole email about why we absolutely positively couldn't do this. And there was somebody on the board who wrote back, and I was talking about all of, I tried to at least, they weren't listening to the arguments of why it was wrong from an ethical perspective. I was trying to say it's a controversial organization behind it. I was trying to make some other arguments. And I remember somebody wrote back and he said, well, it's controversial, maybe we should stay away from it, but if there's a secret plot, I guess we have an obligation to tell people about it. And I thought, well, it's great, right, because it's a secret plot, so how can you prove it one way or another, because it's a secret? So, and I really had to fight tooth and nail to really, before I could get them to not show this film. And I offered, I said, okay, if you really are going to argue, I tried to say, okay, fine, you want to show the film, and why don't I bring in a panel of people to talk about it afterwards? And let's have a real discussion. Show this film, and I'll find you people to come in. No, that goes beyond our educational goals. And so it's a challenge. It is a challenge because, I'd like to say that we've come a long way, and I think that we have come a long way, and at the same time, we haven't. At the same time, we really have not come very far at all. And so I think that for all the people here who are interested in this conversation, who've taken the first step, obviously you're you're all here already. I think the most important thing that we need to do is we need to speak up. We need to share. We need to have those friends, and we need to be able to share about those friendships. And we need to make sure that that message does get spread.
I remember when Rory was invited to Malaysia, I didn't know her that well, but she was very highly recommended as a young star in the Jewish community. And this poor girl was the only Jewish person amongst 200 Muslim women. And I think I had even warned her that I don't know what questions you're going to get, so it might be difficult. And there was a very tough question that somebody asked, I think something about Gaza or something like that. And I was on pins and needles because I felt bad for her. I brought her all the way from New York, and I was like, what is this poor girl going to say? Are they going to bash her? She's the only Jewish person here. But you know what? She was so eloquent. The way she spoke, she put everybody to rest. And because she spoke from the heart, and she talked about her aspirations for the Jewish people, she talked about the aspirations for peace, and she was so genuine. I think that I remember much later in the hallways, people saying, they're not so bad. Actually nice people. I now understand, because she, was speaking with sincerity about her people and their desire to make peace, but also the things that she also was struggling with. And Muslims also struggle with the same issues, in their own community. I think this shows you the power of relationships, and if interfaith dialogue results in anything, it results in these deep relationships where people come to each other's aid when things like this happen, like with the Besa in Albania, people saving Jews during the Holocaust. But for me, it was very. I experienced this last year as we were under attack from people who didn't know us at all. People who just had their own agendas, who decided to attack us on all kinds of false bases. And it was, the Jewish community came out very, very strong in our favor. Yes, Anti-Defamation League made their statement, but that was just one organization. But people who knew us, people who had relationships with us, the rabbis, the institutions, the organizations, each and every one of them went out of their way to make a statement and to literally circle the wagons around us. Because what they felt in our struggle, they remembered their own struggle of what they had to do to define themselves in this country.
Can you talk about that controversy? I don't think the students know that the part of the
Oh, I'm sorry. So many of you heard about the community center that was proposed last year near Ground Zero. So we were the ones who proposed it because we wanted to create an equivalent of a JCC, equivalent Muslim JCC, which would be open to the general public. And because that is what we had been told by our Christian friends and Jewish friends, that to evolve your religion, you have to build certain institutions that basically interact with the general public. So you have to go from just having a mosque to having these community centers that are open to the public. So we proposed it. It was something that we had been thinking about for the last 15 years. And we didn't choose the location. It was in our neighborhood. Remember, we were only 12 blocks away. So it was nothing provocative. We were actually trying to create a counter momentum against extremism because we abhorred what the extremists had done, not only attacking our city, but really even setting the Muslim community back by a decade. Because now we had to tell people that we had to convince people that we are loyal citizens of this country. We have no hidden agenda to take over this nation, that we are here. We contribute significantly to the economic fabric of this country. We are good people. But our job has become so hard because the extremists have pretty much defined the agenda for us. And it's extremists who have their own sort of political motives to do that. But I can now honestly say that after experiencing last year, that I fundamentally now believe that the war is not between religions. The war is between extremists of all religions and the moderate people of all religions. And that is where we need to strategize and work together as communities, because the bulk of the communities are all moderate. They are in the center. The extremists are usually a very small fringe of a fringe. And this fringe of a fringe has basically dominated the discourse for all religious communities. And I can give you one example of Pastor Terry. Last year, you remember he tried to burn the Quran, and then he wanted to barter his Quran burning with us, and he said, you move this mosque, which wasn't even a mosque, and he said, you move it and I will not burn the Quran. So he came all the way to New York. And when he arrived here, and we really did not have strong relationships with the evangelicals, because we have very strong relations with the Jewish community going back a decade, but we didn't have those kinds of relationships. But somebody recommended to one of the evangelicals that, one of you guys is about to burn the Quran. What are you guys going to do about that? So the head of the World Evangelical Association came to New York and basically, interfered between us and Pastor Terry, and met with him, I think by phone, not physically. And he said, we have told the imam not to meet with you. We've advised him not to meet with you because he wanted to meet with my husband. So Pastor Terry said, well, why don't you want me to meet with them? He says, because what you're doing is not Christian-like. We don't burn other people's scriptures. And we are not standing behind you, and in fact, we're rejecting you. And that was a very strong signal, because when he heard that, and they called us and said, please don't meet with him because he's a lunatic. And months later, he did burn the Quran with no TVs, no cameras, and then he put it on YouTube, and somebody found it, and then guess what happened? Exactly what we had feared, that some extremist group found out that he had burnt the Quran, went and killed 12 people from the UN. Innocent people. This is exactly what we had feared, the backlash. And I remember I was on television, and I remember telling Jeff Tunnicliffe, I said, now you know what it feels like to be held hostage by one guy. You can't even control your guy in Florida, and you expect us to control a guy in Afghanistan? And of course, this was before, Osama bin Laden had died. He was still alive. So what I'm saying is that all of us people who are in the middle, in the center, who genuinely believe in peace, have great respect for each other's traditions, have to work together to ensure that extremists do not take the agendas away from our entire communities. Because when they do, I fear for all of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daisy. I want to just give you a couple of minutes for closing remarks, and I would open it up to the floor for good questions. I don't have another mic, but if you can stand up and maybe repeat yourself, we can take questions. So Elena, you want to give some closing?
Sure, thank you. So we were asked to speak personally, and I did, but I kind of added an academic edge, and when I spoke of where's the hope, I spoke in terms of teaching and learning. And so I want to specifically speak out of the Christian tradition that I represent, the Catholic Christian tradition. So on September 12, 2001, Pope Paul talked about the unspeakable sorrow in the hearts of all men and women of goodwill. And I think we all of we who are in the middle, as Daisy just said, continue to carry that unspeakable sorrow. On the first anniversary of the attacks, I felt strongly that we had to do something in our classes. So I joined with another professor, we put a reader together, we tried to do a whole bunch of different things about sacred space, because there was the debate raging about what to do now there. There was a wonderful Matt Davies political cartoon of two people looking over into the footprints, and on the back of one woman it said R.I.P., and on the back of this caricatured man, developer, there were money bags. All right, so we wanted to talk about that debate as well. But one of the last things in the reader was a short sermon by a woman, not Catholic, but Episcopal, so Catholic by some standards, but we won't go there now. But rather well known, as it turns out, Barbara Brown Taylor. And the title of the sermon was "It's Hard to Hug a Bully." It was written 2 years before the attacks. And she described a birthday party of her nephew, 1 year old, doing this little dance for everybody. He was so excited, everybody circled around. And then an 8 or 9 year old cousin, kind of getting fed up with the attention he was getting, bursting through the circle, shoving him to the ground. And after his kind of shock and crying and quickly came, his mother quickly got him over that, she describes how he got up and went over and just hugged his cousin. And she prefaces the sermon with a long quotation from the letter of Paul to the Romans, 12:9-21, which begins, "Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good." And she has a longer quote. So I challenged my students with great trepidation because Iona, I suspect Manhattan is like this as well, has a long tradition of multi-generational firefighters, police officers, and emergency workers. So with great trepidation, I really challenged the group in Introduction to Theology to talk and think about Christian forgiveness with this, and where's forgiveness in all of this. And so in the first discussion, I mostly bombed them all to hell. At 15 weeks later, at the end of the course, people revealed in their anonymous evaluations that that's what they said, and then they really had to deal with the materials in the class. I mean, the class wasn't all about the anniversary, that was one component, but it stuck with them and they thought about it, and they began to try to shift their opinions. So, as Christians, for there to be hope, we really have to attempt to live Christianity. And so I'll just conclude with a little quote from Barbara Brown Taylor, who said, she wanted to go get all these things to arm her nephew so he knew how to grow up in a world that would beat him down like that. And she realized my 1 year old nephew had to teach me about forgiveness. Paul had incredible faith in the power of love, faith that most of us either do not share or are not eager to test. He seemed to understand that the real enemy is not whoever pushes us down in the middle of our dance, but whatever it is inside of us that wants to leap up and push back. Evil is never satisfied with controlling one side of a situation. Its goal is to infect everyone involved, the victim along with the bully, the plaintiff along with the defendant, the offended along with the offender. So, from the Christian perspective, for hope, we have to live it. We have to live that forgiveness, that really tough forgiveness that Christians are called to by their scripture.
I'd like to share a brief story from the Talmud, from the oral tradition in Judaism. And there's a story that appears in the tractate. It's called Tractate Brachot. It's the first book of the Talmud. And it teaches that Rabbi Yossi says, "I was once traveling on the road, and I entered into one of the ruins of Jerusalem in order to pray. Elijah of blessed memory appeared and waited for me at the door until I finished my prayer. After I finished my prayer, he said to me, 'Peace be with you, my master.' And I replied, 'Peace be with you, my master and teacher.' And he said to me, 'My son, why did you go into this ruin?' I replied, 'To pray.' He said,
The dialogue, we did a little exercise where everybody talked about something from their faith that gave them courage, and that that they were able to utilize at moments of difficulties and affliction. What is it that you use from your faith to inspire you, to give you hope? And of course, everybody knew about my story because these are very close friends, and so all eyes were on me. How did you deal with this? What did you do last year? And I talked about the story of the prophet, and I mentioned that we were being attacked from many different sides, especially from all the various blogs and some newspapers and some unsavory characters. And I remember very distinctly the story of the prophet when he had brought his new message to people who didn't believe. It was mostly a polytheistic place. It was people worshiped 375 gods. And the Kaaba, which is the black structure that many of you see, was full of gods. And so the prophet used to walk down this one alley as he would cross with his companions, 2-3 people, to carry the message of the oneness of God. And there was one woman who didn't like what he was saying. And she didn't like the fact that he was passing by and to irritate the entire community. So she would throw garbage. Now, remember, in those days, we didn't have Glad bags and all this kind of fancy garbage. Garbage was real garbage. And they were called entrails, animal entrails. So she would throw it at him, and he would always duck, and sometimes he would get hit. And his companions, who knew that he was a prophet of God, he was receiving revelation, would get so angry that this woman didn't even respect this man. And he would just say, just don't worry about it. And he learned how to duck, and became a routine. And one day as he was walking, there was no garbage. He said, what happened to the lady? And they said, well, beloved prophet, you keep going, we'll find out. So they came to him and they said, oh, she's sick. He said, if she's sick, then I'm going to go visit her. And he actually visited her. He said, I did not see you, I hear you are sick, is everything okay? She was so transformed that this man that she had thrown garbage at all the time was so nice and came to see her. She said, Muhammad, you're a good man, I will accept your message. And of course, she became one of his staunch supporters. I told the story because I said, last year, every time there was a blog that said filthy things, because some of these things were absolute lies, I imagined myself getting hit by entrails. And I just kept saying, it's just an entrail, it's just an entrail. And I would walk into the office and I would tell my staff, don't look at this newspaper, that's just an entrail. So it was very healing for us to be able to do this. And then I said to myself, will I ever have the courage to actually forgive? Will I ever be able to get to that stage where I can sit with these people face to face? And as I finished telling the story, later on, while there was cocktail hour, this one woman came up to me, and she was visibly shaken. She said, I know all about your entrails because I've been reading each and every one of them. And now she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I want you to know those entrails were coming from my family member. And she stood there and she had the name Geller on her name badge. She said, Pamela Geller is my first cousin. And I am sincerely want to apologize to you on behalf of the entire Geller family. And then she said, we have not spoken for 30 years because there was a split in the family. One side of the family decided to be one way, the other side of the family decided to be involved in peace works. And she said, but still she carries my name. And I want, you to forgive me for that. Of course, there was nothing for me to forgive. She had not caused any offense to me. But it's a moment that I'll always cherish and remember. And but I'm also waiting for that moment where I can actually sit across the table from those people that tried to harm us and forgive them. Forgive them for their trespasses. People make mistakes, they make errors. And I hope one day I will reach that stage.
Thank you so much, all of you. I'm just very happy that you're all here, but also I think that we are on that road, and hopefully we will pray, but the prayer will be a long one, right? That's what I mean. I also have a little bit of a surprise story. I received a really nice letter in the mail last week from a poetess who is here amongst us, and she heard about this panel and wanted to come and present one of her poems. Her name is Karen Papagapitos, that's right. And she was born in Tucson, Arizona, before moving to New York in 1973. And she's taught children of migrant workers near Arizona-Sonora border. It was this work that led her to write Jose's Basket. The series won the Benjamin Franklin Award for Children's Literature and has been placed in the United States Library of Congress collection. And she's presented her poetry widely. I don't really know her, but I really love her poetry, and I loved her book. And then she put a ribbon in the book on the poem that's called Women's Voices, because of course she had in mind what we're doing this afternoon. So I just want to invite her to read her poem, which will give you a few minutes to ask your brilliant questions. Okay.
Yes.
The ribbon actually came with the book. I feel you could all actually have written the words of this poem after listening to your beautiful stories and hearts. So I will go ahead and read it and preface it by saying this book was presented at the London Book Fair, and it won a prize for women's peace and women's issues worldwide in March 2001, which was shortly before the event. And since then, I've traveled worldwide and have read from the book. And I made a copy of this poem and also have my email, so if any of you would like the book, you could always email me, or you'll certainly have a copy of the poem. The poem is called Mothers of the World. If it were up to the mothers of the world, they would teach their children lessons to try peace, not war, no more. They would tell them evil's out there, but stronger is the good. Put down the guns and arms, use wise and godly words. They would teach them every day to think and ask and pray. Why we all were put here, it was to walk one way. Walk on the road towards peace, on towards charity for all. Break down all the borders, tumble down the walls. They would teach them to observe the gifts that God has given, and they would force their eyes upon the poor and hunger-driven. Live your lives out well, evil do dispel, shun anger and hate, welcome not at heaven's gate. Yes, the mothers of the world have a glorious heavy task. They must teach their children well, and thus keep us all from hell.
Thank you, Karen. These are the lovely surprises of being in the middle of somewhere like New York and having access to people like Karen. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. If you'd like to ask a question on the mic, if you would come up here, stand next to me. Yes.
That'll be great. My question is actually comes out of ignorance, because I know nothing, absolutely nothing about the Quran, except that people have quoted it who I don't believe other things they have said, so I don't believe their quotes. I don't think that it's only children or young people, but I think it's older people also who want to understand. Now, much of Christianity has been available to us, the Christian liturgy and words and TV and so on has been available to us. But I am embarrassed to say I know nothing about the Quran, and I think it would be very valuable to have comparative literature classes, classes of the Quran, things that would give us substance to understand either what we are challenged by, or what our differences are, or where we compare favorably. I don't know if you have any plans of that nature. Another task and another task. but I can see that as.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm just going to speak for my department here. We do comparative religions. I teach Islam, and I always compare it to Judaism and Christianity. Teaching class on Islam in America, Holocaust and faith from Jewish, Christian, Muslim perspective. And there's a lot of things that are going on in terms of teaching Islam and religious studies. It's interesting, that question to me as a teacher of Islam, because this is not only a post 9/11 question. This is also a pre 9/11 question. Where I remember teaching at Hamilton College, Clinton, New York, was just an adjunct, and I remember it was as it is today. Nobody knew anything about Islam. Nobody knew the Quran existed. So there is a certain long-standing history that has created this vacuum of our relationship as Americans to what we call the Arab, Middle East, Asian, Muslim world. So there's a constant sort of need and search for that. I also want to say that Muslim Americans are very new to this country, so this kind of literature, compared to Jews and Christians in terms of traditions, the literature is unavailable. And there's been also a lack of interest. Pre-9/11, I remember that. It wasn't a popular sort of religion to take. If anything, it was Sufism that people were interested in. It was more spiritual, it was more, personal, it was more about self-growth. So there's a lot of different kind of ways to answer your question, but I'm going to give it to Daisy because it's really her question.
Shortly after 9/11, my husband used to teach at comparative religion at St. Bartholomew's Church, and he would get like 30 people, and then they put a class called the Quran, and you could imagine the walls were bursting. I mean, there was not enough space in the room because hundreds of people signed up. So it's very important to understand the source of where Muslim sourcing comes from, which is the Quran. We believe it's the ultimate authority. It's God. God has authored the book himself. And I will ask you to go to two places that are very practical for now. There is a site, if you want to know all the Quranic references that people talk about vis-a-vis women, because much of what you see has to do with women. So there's a site called wisemuslimwomen.org. And if you just go to the issues section, you will see all the issues that people talk about, women's issues, and then some of the Quranic references are in there. That is a site that I've helped build with Muslim women from around the world, and at least you'll have information, readily available information on Muslim women issues.
And you can ask questions.
You can ask questions, yes. Then the other site is my organization's site, which also has a very robust Q&A on it. If you just want to know everything about Islam, and that's www.asma, like asthma without the TH, asthma, society.org. And there's a section called Religion, Go in Religion, and you can also see comparative religions because we have a whole Q&A on interfaith, and we have a Q&A on Islam. If you have any questions, send us a question on either one of these sites and we'll answer your question.
Yeah, I would like to respond. I think it's a wonderful question. As a member of the Department of Religious Studies, sitting next to the provost of the institution and looking at my dean, I would think that the Department of Religious Studies would be more than interested in developing some program in the evenings or whatever time was convenient for the community. And I will try to see if we can facilitate that.
What's your name, sir?
Stephen Kaplan. I'll give you a card.
I would just like to add one other website, and I can attest for its how good it is. It's brand new. I found it while I was poking around looking for things for today, and it's called She Answers Abraham. It's on blogspot.com. So it's the website's actually she and then like a dash answers dash Abraham.blogspot.com, but I think if you just Google She Answers Abraham, and it's a Jewish, a Christian, and a Muslim woman who specifically wanted to do something for the 10th anniversary, and they're not comfortable revealing their identities right now because they don't want to deal with the entrails, They're concerned about that and safety. So for now, they're not revealing their identities, but this writer found one member of it. And so every Friday, they're going to post a piece of scripture from one of the traditions and talk about it from each of their perspectives. So that looked very new, and it just launched.
You have another question?
Yes.
I've been speaking around the issue of femininity. For instance, she answers Abraham, or oh, it said from the mother's perspective. I would like, if you will, each of the panelists to speak to their personal experience as women and how has being a woman shaped their perspective of religion and ethics.
It's a very difficult question. For myself, coming from a community in which women are not treated equally as men, it's something that I personally struggle with very much. And it's something, looking at the texts, having studied the texts, clearly from the perspective of my teachers coming out of my own community, so obviously with that lens, I feel myself very much a part of my community, and at the same time I feel myself very much pushed outside of the community, and that's something that's incredibly difficult to balance. And so in my own studies right now, in a program that's specifically for Orthodox Jewish women to study texts that have been traditionally closed off to Orthodox Jewish women, and to try to create a space within the community for women to take on roles that have historically been, again, closed off to women. And so this is a very difficult question of how does one balance what one sees as the traditional reading of texts with what we believe to be the ethical standard, for lack of a better term right now. And I believe very firmly that that Torah, that halakha, that the Jewish legal system is an ethical system. I don't believe that it's inherently unfair. I believe very strongly in the system. And at the same time, I'm the product of generations and centuries and millennia of interpretations of those traditions. And so I know that for myself, for other people within my own community, for other women within the community, it's a constant struggle to ask, what does it mean to be a woman in the Orthodox Jewish community? And how does that change what our experience is for other people, towards other people, and within the community itself? And so I'm thinking, it's such a broad question that it can go on forever, so I'm trying to think of it specifically in the context of healing and thinking specifically about our panel. And I know in my own experience that there are opportunities in which women have taken those roles of healing in a way that the men have been unable to do within the community, that there's conversations that have taken place. As we heard before with the poem, mothers who share the experiences of what it means to lose a child in conflict, that can come together from both sides of that conflict and share that hurt and really come to a new relationship together. Women who come together as sisters, women who come together as the heads of their families, whatever context those are, the conversation is very different among women. And so for as much as I've been a part of some of the interfaith dialogue, some of the most powerful dialogue that I've been a part of has really been the dialogue amongst women. The experience, as Daisy referenced before, if I can share briefly, she mentioned about the question that I had in Malaysia. I don't know actually if you know. Afterwards, there was a bit of a cocktail hour afterwards, as Daisy referenced, and the woman who asked me a question came over to me afterwards. And she came over to me and she got very close and she said, "I really don't think that you really answered my question, and I really want to push you on this." And immediately there were two women who were just standing around. Maybe they'd been asking me a question. They were standing. And they physically linked arms with me. They physically linked arms, and I was speaking to the woman. I was talking to her, and we were just having a very respectful conversation. But these women slowly started to really kind of crowd around me, and I really felt enveloped by them. And at one point, one woman actually, she just came over and she really just linked arms with me, and then she slowly just took me away. She said, "I need you over here right now," and she led me away. And I was not in any way under attack. This other woman, she had every right to ask some very difficult questions. There was something that both of us were really struggling with. But that experience of what was it like here, for me to be the only Jewish woman in this environment, for this woman who I believe she actually was from Palestine or lived in Gaza, was really struggling with her own pain, and really was hoping that I had some answers for her. And what did it mean for these women to come over to me at this conference, these Muslim women, and to physically link arms with me and surround me and make sure that I felt welcome in this setting? That they knew that I was this minority within their community, and the most important thing for them was that I felt safe and protected. And that was incredibly powerful for me. And for me, that's been very much the experience of what happens when women come together.
Shortly after 9/11, when my husband was going to a lot of the lectures at synagogues and churches and all kinds of venues, think tanks. I remember one day that I was doing his scheduling because I was running the voluntary organization. I had a job in the corporate arena, and one day I had double booked him for a church and a synagogue by accident. And he said, "Well, now you go tell them I'm not coming." I said, "Well, I can't, I can't go to the synagogue and then come back to the church." Well, it just so happened it was impossible. It was impossible to do both. So I looked at him and I said, "We can't call this church and tell them you're not coming. What are we going to do?" He said, "Why don't you go and do it?" I said, "Well, I've never spoken." And he said, "You've heard me 1,000 times. Just repeat what I say." And so I went to the church, and it was in the basement. There were like 30 senior citizens there. And I walked in there and said, "Phew, old people, they probably don't know anything. It's great." and it was really, that's what got me going. And they were so receptive to what I was saying. They were so forgiving. They were so kind. And I realized my own power. I actually realized I could deliver. I realized I had learned so much, and it was all inside of me, and it was just coming out. I was a channel for this information. And most importantly, what was empowering to me was that these people were actually learning from me. And they were learning from me, and they were acknowledging my leadership. So, and then during that time, one lady asked me this tough question, "But what about women?" So I rattled off all the things that we know in our scripture of how women have the right to divorce, they have a right to own property, they have the right to wealth, they have the right, all these rights that I was rattling off. And then she said to me, she says, "My dear, I trust you. Believe me, I'm sure that's how it is, but can you explain to me why they just killed that woman in the soccer field who had 5 children? That public killing, that woman in a burqa, that very powerful image." And that's when I realized I don't have an answer for her. And believe it or not, that question, I took that question back to my husband, and of course, having an imam in-house, it helps. I just started bugging him. I said, "Well, why was she shot?" He said, "Daisy, I don't know." I said, "Well, what, the crime that she committed, are we supposed to kill people like that?" He said, "No." And of course, I realized that, that we had a lot of work to do. Because even though we fundamentally believe this is not a violation, that our scripture clearly supports, women and treats women equally, there are many men that, don't believe that or are willing to distort our scripture for political gain. And that is why I started this large-scale initiative. But I didn't start it on my own. I actually learned from the feminist movement in this country that there was such a thing as the suffrage movement, because women didn't have the right to education, to have their own bank account, to have the right to vote. And it wasn't so long ago that this stuff was going on in this country. And that it had to be women who stood up and said, "Wait a minute, why does the Constitution say all men are created equal and, you know, whereas we women don't have these rights? And they fought that struggle. And then, you know, these struggles have been fought by Jewish women, Christian women. These struggles have been fought by women in all religions. And so I came to the conclusion that women's history is one history. We've all struggled in all our faiths. And it's right now the turn of the Muslim women who are struggling to define themselves and to, you know, take their rights back. So, you know, it's really 9/11 that has actually helped me and catalyzed my own work, which is now global, and we have conferences, and I'm hoping that the joint collaboration of Jewish Muslim women, Christian Muslim women, cooperating with one another, so we lift each other up. We're already conspiring of, you know, getting together and talking about our joint problems, so that we can come up with our own solutions and, you know, learn from each other's strategies. Thank you.
I'll be very, very brief. I don't think it's a matter of being biologically a woman. It's a matter of having a feminist perspective. Dr. Saraceno here in the Religious Studies Department, and I and several other women collaborated on a book in feminist theology just recently. And we share, you know, many of the struggles as Catholic women with Judaism and Islam as women. So I think, again, in terms of healing and going forward, in terms of 9/11 as we close now, I would agree wholeheartedly with Daisy saying it's a war of extremists. So within our own religions, we have to fight our own extremists, and then it's intra and inter, and so we have to move forward with a liberative perspective for all.
Okay, I'm going to close now because I really want you to enjoy talking with each other and asking your burning questions personally, face to face with our panelists. And I want to thank everyone for being here. And the last thought I want you to leave with is that, you know, we have a lot of work to do. And I mean, my community as a Muslim, we as a community in America, and every day I am fighting Islamophobia. And every day I'm fighting anti-Semitism, and I'm not sure which is worse and what's going on all the time. So there's a lot of work that we all need to do, and I need all of your help. So I want to say that thank you. I'm honored that you're here, and I'll see my students in the morning. Bye-bye.